Story: Millionaire divorced his pregnant wife. Then 12 Black Rolls-Royces arrived to take her home. Hello, everyone. Disclaimer: this story is entirely fictional and created for entertainment. Victoria Ashford, Daniel Harrington, the Ashford Foundation, Harrington Development Group, and all people, companies, legal disputes, and events described here are invented. Any resemblance to reality is coincidental. Legal, medical, charitable, and business details are dramatized and should not be treated as professional advice. 8 months pregnant, Victoria Ashford walked out of a New York divorce proceeding with no intention of humiliating the man who had humiliated her in front of 600 people. Then 12 Black Rolls-Royces arrived. As you listen, ask yourself one question. If you had the power to punish a former spouse, but using it could also hurt mothers, nurses, patients, and ordinary employees, where would you draw the line? Tell us what you would choose. First, the morning of the divorce. The judgment of divorce had been entered that morning in New York County. Victoria and Daniel had already negotiated the issues that could properly be resolved before their daughter's birth through separate attorneys. A New York State Supreme Court justice reviewed the papers and signed the judgment of divorce, and it was filed and entered with the county clerk. By the time Victoria stepped outside carrying a certified copy, their marital status had legally ended. Any post-birth parentage, parenting time, or child support issues would be handled separately through the proper process. She was 8 months pregnant. Daniel emerged several minutes later and saw her near the curb in a navy maternity coat, one hand at the small of her back. For months he had controlled announcements, photographs, donor lists, and talking points. This moment would not belong to him. A black Rolls-Royce turned onto the street. Then another. 4 became 6. 6 became 9. By the time the 12th black Rolls-Royce took its place along the curb, pedestrians had slowed and cameras were raised. The first door opened and Eleanor Ashford stepped out. Victoria's widowed aunt wore a camel coat and sensible shoes. Behind her, trustees and family office staff remained in the cars. They had been in Manhattan for an Ashford Foundation meeting when Eleanor ordered the group to leave together. "Eleanor," Victoria asked, laughing through sudden tears. "All 12. Her aunt glanced at the convoy. "Your grandfather bought them over 30 years and refused to sell anything that still worked. Today his terrible habit is finally useful." Eleanor took the folder from Victoria. "You kept this part," she said. "I needed to. And now?" Victoria looked at Daniel. He had once told 600 strangers their marriage was ending before he had found the courage to tell his pregnant wife properly. "Victoria," he called. "I didn't know." Her eyes stayed calm. "That was never the worst thing you didn't know." She turned to Eleanor. "Take me home." Her aunt opened the rear door. Not to revenge. To Ashford House, where Victoria would finish her pregnancy, return to the healthcare work she had abandoned, and decide what kind of parent she wanted to become. The 12 Rolls-Royces pulled into Manhattan traffic one by one. Daniel watched until the last car disappeared. 6 weeks earlier, he had still believed he controlled the story. That night had begun beneath crystal chandeliers. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across the Grand Regent Hotel in Manhattan. Nearly 600 guests filled the ballroom for the annual Hope for Mothers Gala, an event raising money for prenatal clinics and emergency maternity care throughout New York. Physicians sat beside donors. Nurses in formal dress laughed near the stage. Television cameras waited for the evening's headline moment. Daniel Harrington, founder of Harrington Development Group, would receive the Civic Vision Award for promising to build affordable medical facilities in underserved neighborhoods. Victoria Ashford stood near the back of the room with one hand beneath her 7-month pregnancy. Her midnight blue gown was elegant but simple, chosen to make movement easier. She had declined the reserved front table because Daniel had told her the event would be too complicated and suggested she rest at home. She had come anyway, not to challenge him, not to surprise the press. She carried a slim folder containing the final approval for a charitable commitment that would make the first clinic possible. The donation came from the Ashford Foundation, but Victoria had requested that the announcement focus on doctors and patients rather than her family. On stage, Daniel looked every inch the celebrated millionaire. At 38, he had the practiced confidence of a man who had learned how to pause for applause. His charcoal tuxedo fit perfectly. His speech praised innovation, private investment, and the responsibility of successful people to strengthen their cities. Victoria listened with mixed pride and grief. Most of the language had once belonged to both of them. Years earlier, in a kitchen too small for 2 chairs, they had sketched ideas for neighborhood health centers on the backs of grocery receipts. Daniel concluded to a standing ovation. Then Emily Carter joined him at the microphone. Emily was the company's communications director, brilliant, camera-ready, and increasingly present in every part of Daniel's life. She wore a silver gown and touched his arm as she thanked the sponsors. The gesture appeared professional to the room. Victoria knew better. She had seen messages. She had heard late-night calls stop the moment she entered. She had spent 3 months waiting for Daniel to tell the truth. A reporter shouted, "Mr. Harrington, where is your wife tonight?" Daniel's smile tightened. He looked toward Emily, then toward the audience. For an instant, Victoria thought he might finally acknowledge her. Instead, he said, "Victoria and I have decided to end our marriage. We ask for privacy as we move forward separately." The ballroom changed in a single breath. Victoria had not agreed to any announcement. They had discussed counseling, separation, and legal advice, but no papers had been filed. Daniel had chosen a charitable stage, and the moment of his greatest professional praise, to make their private crisis public. Cameras turned through the room, searching for her. Emily leaned closer to Daniel, as if offering support. The image was immediate and devastating. The successful man, the elegant executive, and the absent pregnant wife already edited out of the picture. Victoria could have walked to the stage. She could have opened the folder and told the audience that the anonymous donor making Daniel's project possible was her family. She could have displayed the messages showing that his relationship with Emily had crossed professional boundaries. Instead, she remained still. Beside her, Dr. Naomi Bennett, the obstetrician who led the clinic initiative, recognized her. "Victoria," she whispered, "did you know he was going to do that?" "No. Do you want me to stop the program?" Victoria looked toward the nurses seated near the stage. Some served communities where expectant mothers traveled more than an hour for care. The evening was larger than Daniel's betrayal. "No," she said. "The patients did nothing wrong." Daniel stepped down from the stage and finally saw her. The blood left his face. Victoria crossed the ballroom slowly. Guests moved aside, not because they knew who she was, but because dignity has a presence that spectacle cannot imitate. She stopped several feet from Daniel and Emily. "You should have told me before you told 600 strangers," she said. Daniel lowered his voice. "We need to speak privately." "We did. You avoided the conversation." Emily began. "Victoria, this is not what it looks like." Victoria turned to her. "Please do not insult me twice in the same minute." Then she handed the folder to Dr. Bennett. "The clinic funding is approved," Victoria said. "The commitment is unconditional on tonight's personal events. Your counsel will receive the documents in the morning." Daniel stared at her. "What funding?" Victoria met his eyes. "The funding you thanked everyone for except the person standing in front of you." She left the ballroom before the questions began. No convoy waited outside. No cameras followed quickly enough. Only a dark sedan stood at the curb, driven by Henry Lawson, an old family advisor who had known her since childhood. He opened the rear door, but did not bow. He simply said, "I am sorry." Victoria settled into the seat, placed both hands over her daughter, and finally allowed herself to shake. "Take me home, Henry." "To the apartment?" She looked back at the hotel, where Daniel's award was already becoming the least important story of the night. "No," she said. "To Ashford House." The sedan moved north through Manhattan, while Victoria watched lights slide across the window. Henry did not ask questions during the first 10 minutes. He understood that silence could be a form of protection. At last, Victoria said, "He announced the end of our marriage before we had even chosen attorneys." "I heard. He knew reporters would ask about me. That was why he told me to stay home." Henry's hands tightened around the steering wheel. "Would you like the foundation to withdraw from the clinic partnership?" "No. Dr. Bennett has spent 4 years building that program. Mothers should not lose care because my husband lost his integrity." The answer cost her. Part of Victoria wanted Daniel to feel, immediately and publicly, how much of his celebrated project depended on work he had never noticed. But she also knew the difference between consequences and collateral damage. Ashford House stood in Westchester County behind old stone walls and winter bare trees. It was not a palace. Its beauty came from proportion, age, and the evidence that generations had repaired rather than replaced what they inherited. Warm lamps glowed across the entrance as Henry drove beneath the portico. Eleanor Ashford, Victoria's widowed aunt, was waiting before the car stopped. She wore a wool cardigan over evening clothes and ignored every rule of formal welcome by opening the door herself. Victoria stepped out and fell into her arms. For several minutes, she was no longer the composed woman from the ballroom. She was a pregnant daughter of the house, exhausted from pretending she could carry disappointment without help. Eleanor held her until the trembling eased. "You are safe here. I should have come sooner. You came when you were ready." Inside, the library smelled of cedar, tea, and the faint smoke of a dying fire. Victoria had spent childhood afternoons there reading biographies of women who built hospitals, schools, and legal aid centers. Her grandfather used to say that inheritance was not permission to live above other people. It was an obligation to widen the ground beneath them. Henry placed a sealed envelope on the table. "Your grandfather left this with the family office," he said. "He instructed us to give it to you if you ever returned because someone had mistaken your quietness for dependence." Victoria recognized the handwriting. Her grandfather had died 4 years earlier, weeks before her wedding. She broke the seal. "My dearest Victoria, a private life is a worthy choice, but secrecy must never become self-erasure. Love should allow you to be known gradually and honestly. Test character, yes, but do not build a marriage around a test your spouse does not know he is taking. If you return hurt, do not use the family name as a weapon. Use it as a tool, and use the truth as a boundary." Victoria read the passage twice. Eleanor sat across from her. He was not excusing Daniel. "I know." Victoria folded the letter. "He was reminding me that I also made choices." She had hidden more than money. Victoria held a graduate degree in architecture and specialized in healthcare design. Before marrying Daniel, she had worked under a shortened version of her name on rural clinic projects funded by the Ashford Foundation. She had advised Daniel on his first development proposals, but when he began presenting their ideas as his alone, she told herself recognition did not matter. Now she understood how many small silences had taught him not to see her. Her phone displayed 37 missed calls. Daniel had left 12 messages. The first sounded angry. He demanded to know why she had interfered with the clinic funding. The fourth sounded confused. He had learned that the donation came from the Ashford Foundation. By the 8th, his voice had changed. "Victoria, call me. I did not know you were connected to them." She listened once, then turned off the phone. Eleanor poured tea. "What will you do tomorrow?" "Hire counsel. And tonight?" Victoria rested her hand over the child moving beneath her heart. "Tonight, I am going to sleep somewhere. I am not being replaced." Daniel Harrington had not always confused applause with love. 8 years earlier, he was a young project manager carrying rolled plans through the rain because he could not afford a taxi. Victoria met him at a community meeting in Queens, where residents were fighting to keep a neighborhood health center open. Daniel had priced the building. Victoria had priced the human cost. "You calculated renovation," she told him. "You did not calculate what happens when pregnant women lose nearby care." Instead of becoming defensive, he stayed until the janitor turned off the lights. They spent weeks redesigning the project. The clinic survived. 2 years later, Daniel proposed on the same sidewalk. Their early marriage was a real partnership. Victoria reviewed plans, found grants, and introduced him to community leaders. She never promised Ashford money, and when projects deserved consideration, she connected them to independent professionals who made their own decisions. Daniel worked hard and built a legitimate company. Success changed him slowly. New advisors taught him to treat image as an asset. Emily Carter, his communications director, understood exactly how to feed that need. She praised decisions Victoria questioned and called caution fear. When Victoria, 5 months pregnant, objected to a luxury development that could displace elderly tenants, Daniel told her he needed a wife, not another critic. Weeks later, Victoria found intimate messages between Daniel and Emily. Counseling sessions were scheduled and canceled. During a Chicago conference, the relationship became physical. Daniel admitted it only after a hotel charge contradicted his story. Victoria asked for a separation and legal advice. Daniel feared the news would damage an awards season important to his company. Emily suggested controlling the narrative before anyone else could. Together, they prepared the sentence he delivered at the Hope for Mother's Gala. They told themselves it was strategic. They did not consider that Victoria might be standing in the room with the approval for the very clinic project that made Daniel look generous. Back at Ashford House, Victoria awoke before dawn with the memory of Daniel's face when he saw her. There had been shock, then fear, not that he had hurt her, but that she knew something he did not. She walked to the old drafting room and uncovered a table stored beneath linen. Her first clinic plan still rested in a flat drawer. For years, she had made herself smaller to protect a love that was supposed to protect her. That morning, she sharpened a pencil and began drawing again. The weeks after the gala were quieter and harder. Victoria retained her own matrimonial attorney. Daniel retained separate counsel. They negotiated property, pregnancy-related medical expenses, and the issues that could properly be settled before their daughter's birth. Service, filings, and settlement papers moved through counsel. Neither side pretended that signing something in a conference room could end a marriage by itself. 6 weeks later, the legal process reached the morning we have already seen. A New York State Supreme Court justice signed the judgment of divorce. It was filed and entered with the county clerk, and Victoria left Manhattan in the 12-car Ashford convoy. The next day, she returned to work at the foundation. Dr. Naomi Bennett studied her across a conference table. "Do you want to stop?" Victoria looked at a map of neighborhoods without adequate prenatal care. "No, we have work." The project was larger than the single clinic Daniel had described at the gala. The Ashford Foundation planned 5 maternal health centers, mobile prenatal units, transportation support, and partnerships with existing hospitals. Victoria had helped design the model years before, under the professional name Victoria A. Ford, to keep attention on the work rather than her inheritance. The foundation needed a development partner. Harrington Development was one of 4 finalists. Henry asked whether Daniel's firm should be removed to avoid discomfort. "Not because of me," Victoria said, "but I will disclose the relationship and recuse myself from scoring his proposal." Independent counsel approved the process. Victoria left the room whenever Harrington Development was discussed. She did not contact reviewers. She did not threaten funding. Her private pain would not become a hidden instruction. Daniel interpreted the silence differently. He had spent the weeks after the gala discovering how much Victoria had concealed. He learned about her architectural training, her foundation work, and the Ashford family's long history of financing hospitals. Each discovery made him feel deceived, then ashamed for feeling deceived. Emily encouraged his anger. "She manipulated you," Emily said in his office. "She let you believe you built everything alone." Daniel looked at the early clinic sketches preserved in company archives. Victoria's handwriting covered the margins. "I did build the company. Then act like it. Demand the contract." The old Daniel would have rejected the word demand. The newer one asked his staff to prepare an aggressive presentation. During the finalist interview, Daniel entered the foundation boardroom expecting Victoria at the head of the table. Her chair was empty. Dr. Bennett explained the recusal. "Ms. Ashford will not participate in evaluating your company because of the prior marital relationship." Daniel should have felt relieved. Instead, the empty chair unsettled him. Victoria was protecting the fairness of a process he had assumed she would use against him. His team presented strong construction experience, but independent reviewers raised concerns. Harrington Development's proposal overstated the amount of charitable money it had already committed. Several community support letters appeared nearly identical. Relocation costs were lower than comparable projects. None of those issues proved fraud, but they required answers. Daniel turned to Emily, who had supervised the public benefit materials. She smiled too quickly. "Those are formatting questions." The lead reviewer disagreed. "They are governance questions." For the first time, Daniel wondered whether the person who always praised his instincts had also been protecting him from information he needed to hear. After the meeting, he found Victoria in the lobby speaking with a group of nurses. "You recused yourself," he said. "Of course. You could have destroyed the proposal." Victoria's expression hardened. "I could have behaved like the version of me you invented after the gala. I chose not to." "Did you help build this project?" "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me?" "I tried to tell you about the work many times. You were interested when you thought the ideas were yours." The elevator doors opened. Daniel lowered his voice. "Were you ever going to tell me who you were?" "I was preparing to tell you after the baby was born." She paused. "Then I learned who you had become." She stepped into the elevator, leaving him with the first honest answer he had received and the knowledge that he had made it arrive too late. The governance questions did not disappear. Daniel ordered an independent review of the hospital proposal and the charitable reports his company had issued during the previous 2 years. He expected minor mistakes. Instead, auditors found a pattern created by pressure, vanity, and weak oversight. Emily's team had counted conditional pledges as completed donations. It had reused community endorsement language without clearly documenting who approved the final letters. Travel and entertainment expenses connected to Daniel's conferences had been charged to promotional budgets that supported charitable partnerships. The conduct was not evidence that every project was false, but it made the company's public claims unreliable. Emily blamed junior employees. Daniel read the interview notes and recognized his own role. He had demanded impressive numbers. He had rewarded good news and dismissed caution. Emily had learned exactly what kind of information earned access to him. In a formal meeting with counsel and human resources present, Daniel asked her whether the records were accurate. "They were presented aggressively," she replied. "That is what communications teams do." "Did you know the pledges were conditional?" "Yes, but they were likely to close." "Did you approve the expense classifications?" Emily crossed her arms. "You attended those dinners." "That was not my question." Her expression changed. "Do not make me the villain because your wife turned out to be richer than you." Daniel felt the sentence strike the center of his shame. For months, he had let Emily describe Victoria as an obstacle. Now Emily was still measuring the injury in money. "This is not about Victoria's wealth," he said. "It is about records signed in my company's name." The review continued under counsel. Emily was placed on leave and later terminated after the company completed its process. Daniel did not announce that she alone had caused the problem. The board required corrective disclosures, stronger controls, and an independent ethics officer. Daniel voluntarily stepped aside from leading the hospital bid. Harrington Development remained a successful business. It did not collapse overnight. Projects continued. Employees kept their jobs. But the company lost the hope for Mother's contract because another finalist offered stronger community protections and cleaner documentation. Daniel accepted the decision publicly. Privately, he struggled. Awards disappeared from the walls of his apartment because he could no longer look at them without remembering the gala. He attended therapy after the board chairman told him that remorse without changed behavior was only another form of self-protection. He wrote Victoria 3 apology letters and sent none of them. Each draft asked her, indirectly, to relieve his guilt. Then he wrote a 4th. "Victoria, I betrayed our marriage, announced our separation without your consent, and allowed my need for admiration to make you invisible. Your secrecy created questions between us, but it did not cause my choices. I am not writing to ask for reconciliation. I am writing because you deserved a truthful sentence from me long before now. I was wrong." He mailed it through her attorney. Victoria read the letter in the nursery at Ashford House. She cried, not because it restored hope, but because it finally named reality without excuses. Eleanor found her beside the window. "Does it change anything?" she asked. "It changes what I have to argue with in my own mind." "Will you answer?" Victoria considered the question. After the baby is born, her physician had warned her to reduce stress. She turned off financial news, delegated foundation work, and spent mornings walking beneath old trees with Henry. She also met with a family law mediator to prepare a parenting framework. Daniel would receive medical updates through agreed channels. He could attend the birth if Victoria felt safe and if hospital rules allowed, but he would not use the moment to discuss their marriage. The boundaries were specific because vague hope had already caused enough damage. One evening, Daniel called the mediator rather than Victoria. "I want to do this correctly," he said. "Then begin by accepting that access to your child and access to your former wife are different relationships." Daniel closed his eyes. "I understand." For the first time, he meant it. Charlotte Harrington was born on a snowy morning in February. Labor began before dawn. Victoria called Eleanor, her physician, and the mediator-approved number for Daniel. She had spent weeks deciding whether she wanted him present. In the end, she chose a limited invitation. He could wait at the hospital and meet his daughter after the delivery, but the labor room would remain private. Daniel arrived without an assistant, a publicist, or flowers large enough to attract attention. He wore an old navy coat Victoria remembered from the early years of their marriage. For 6 hours, he sat in a family waiting area beside Henry and said almost nothing. At 10:43 a.m., a nurse appeared. "Mother and baby are healthy." Daniel covered his face with both hands. Henry watched him carefully. "Relief is not redemption." "I know." An hour later, the nurse led Daniel into Victoria's room. She looked exhausted, pale, and more peaceful than he had seen her in years. Charlotte slept against her chest beneath a white blanket. Daniel stopped near the doorway. "Come closer," Victoria said. He approached slowly. When she placed the baby in his arms, his confidence disappeared. Charlotte opened dark blue eyes, frowned at the unfamiliar world, and wrapped her fingers around one of his. Daniel wept without trying to hide it. "Hello," he whispered. "I am your father. I have a great deal to learn." Victoria watched him. There had been a time when that sight would have made her imagine a restored marriage. Now she understood that tenderness in one moment did not erase betrayal. But neither did betrayal require her to deny their daughter a father who was willing to become responsible. They completed the hospital paperwork and followed the post-birth legal process their attorneys had prepared. Parenting time would begin gradually, with schedules designed around Charlotte's health and feeding needs. Parentage and financial support issues would be handled through the appropriate legal channels rather than improvised in a hospital room. Neither parent would use the child to carry messages about the divorce. Daniel returned Charlotte to Victoria. "I received your letter," she said. He waited. "You told the truth. I should have done it sooner." "Yes. I am not asking you to forgive me." "Good. Because forgiveness is something I may choose for my own peace. It is not a door back into my life." Daniel nodded. The answer hurt, but he did not argue. Victoria continued. "I also should have been more honest about my work and my family. I thought secrecy would protect love. Instead, it prevented us from becoming fully known to each other." Daniel looked down. "That does not excuse me." "No. It explains one weakness in the marriage. Your affair and the gala were choices." "I understand." Charlotte stirred, ending the conversation with a small cry. Daniel smiled through tears. "She has strong timing. She is an Ashford and a Harrington," Victoria said. "She will probably have strong opinions about everything." For a moment, they laughed like the two people who had once shared soup in a small kitchen. Then the moment passed without becoming a promise. Daniel left after 20 minutes. In the hallway, he declined a call from a reporter who had learned about the birth. He issued only a short statement through counsel. Mother and child were healthy. The family requested privacy, and no photographs would be released. It was the first family announcement he made with Victoria's consent. 6 months later, the First Hope for Mothers Center opened in Queens, 2 blocks from the community hall where Victoria and Daniel had met. The building did not carry the Ashford name. A plaque near the entrance honored local nurses, midwives, patients, and residents who had spent years demanding better care. The foundation had funded construction, but Victoria insisted that the neighborhood be remembered as the author of the project. She stood on the outdoor stage in an ivory suit, while Charlotte slept in Eleanor's arms near the front row. Dr. Naomi Bennett described the center's services: prenatal care, high-risk pregnancy support, mental health counseling, transportation assistance, and extended evening hours for working families. When Victoria approached the microphone, applause rose from people who knew her not as a mysterious heiress, but as the architect who had attended planning meetings, corrected inaccessible entrances, and asked nurses where they needed electrical outlets. "My grandfather taught me that generosity is not measured by how visible the giver becomes," she said. "It is measured by whether the person receiving help can stand taller afterward." She did not mention Daniel, the divorce, or the gala. Daniel watched from the side of the crowd. He had been invited as Charlotte's father, not as an honored developer. He arrived quietly and remained away from the cameras. Harrington Development had spent the previous months correcting its reports, repaying improperly allocated promotional expenses, and creating a community advisory council with real authority. Daniel had also changed the way he worked. He asked employees for bad news before good news. He stopped entering meetings last. He sold the penthouse and moved into a smaller apartment near Charlotte's pediatrician, not as a performance of humility, but because his old home had become a monument to a life he no longer respected. His company was rebuilding trust one project at a time. After the ceremony, Victoria brought Charlotte to him beneath a row of young maple trees. "She slept through my entire speech," Victoria said. Daniel smiled. A demanding critic. He took the baby and adjusted the sunshade over her face. Their parenting schedule had become steady. He arrived on time. He followed medical guidance. When business travel conflicted with his days, he changed the travel rather than expecting Victoria to rearrange the child. None of those actions was extraordinary. That was the lesson. Responsibility was not a grand gesture. It was a pattern. I saw the revised plans for the senior housing project, Victoria said. The tenant protections are better. The community council rewrote part of them. Did that bother you? Once it would have. Daniel looked toward the clinic. Now I think a building should belong to the people who must live with it. Victoria studied him. The answer sounded like the man she had first loved, but she no longer confused a familiar voice with proof that time could be reversed. Emily had moved to another state after the investigation. Daniel did not discuss her with Victoria unless a legal matter required it. He had accepted that blaming Emily would be another attempt to avoid ownership. A photographer approached and asked whether the former couple would pose together with Charlotte. Daniel looked at Victoria before answering. No, she said politely. Our daughter is not part of a publicity story. The photographer moved away. Daniel handed Charlotte back. Thank you for inviting me. You belong at events that matter to her. He understood the boundary inside the kindness. As Victoria walked toward the clinic entrance, Daniel watched nurses welcome the first patients. The project he once believed would complete his public image had become meaningful only after his image was removed from its center. For the first time, that did not feel like a loss. That evening, Victoria returned to Ashford House and placed Charlotte in the nursery beneath a mobile shaped like small white birds. The baby reached upward, fascinated by shadows moving across the ceiling. Eleanor stood in the doorway. Daniel has changed. He is changing, Victoria corrected. There is a difference. Do you ever imagine trying again? Victoria considered the question honestly. She no longer hated him. She no longer needed him to fail. Some days, she even missed the young man who had carried plans through the rain and stayed after a community meeting to listen. But missing a person from the past was not the same as trusting the person in the present. I imagine Charlotte growing up with two parents who tell her the truth, Victoria said. That is enough for now. Downstairs, Henry had left her grandfather's letter on the library desk. Victoria reread the final lines. Do not use the family name as a weapon. Use it as a tool, and use the truth as a boundary. She had done both. The Ashford Foundation would open 4 more centers. Victoria would lead the design program after completing an independent review by the board. Daniel would continue rebuilding his company without claiming that public service belonged to him alone. Their marriage was over. Their responsibility as parents had begun. Months later, when Charlotte took her first steps, she moved from Victoria's hands toward Daniel's open arms during a scheduled visit in the garden. Both parents laughed. Neither used the moment to rewrite history. That was their second chance, not at the same marriage, but at becoming better people in the life that followed it. The gala created a headline. The clinic created a legacy. Victoria never needed Daniel to lose everything in order to prove she had value. She needed truth, boundaries, meaningful work, and a daughter who could grow up loving both parents without being asked to rewrite the past. Their marriage ended. Their responsibility did not. And the 12 Black Rolls-Royces that once carried Victoria home became far less important than the life S.